Allow a little people join in. All right, welcome everyone. I want to welcome you to our summer network call. Thank you all for joining National Skills Coalition Government Affairs team for a federal update. This call will be recorded and we'll share the recording and the slides to everyone who's registered in a wrap-up email. My name is Nakeisha. I'm the director of National Network. And today I'm joined by Megan, who's our director of government affairs, and Caroline, who's our senior manager. We're going to cover everything that's going on in Congress and also with the presidential administration and why it matters for workforce stakeholders across the country and how you can take action. Is the slides up, Megan? Yep. Okay. Okay, Megan. Okay. Let's go over the agenda. So today we're going to cover the final workforce bill regulations and what they mean. Oh, sorry, you're right, Megan. You're right. That was me. Okay. If you joined the summit, you might remember seeing this advocacy calendar. We're at the point in the advocacy calendar where appropriation markups are happening, and we're about to enter the July season where congressional home visits will start ramping up and where Workforce Pell eligible programs will begin. And we're going to discuss both of those topics in depth today. Next slide. All right, so what are we going to cover today? We're going to cover the final Workforce Pell regulations and what they mean for workforce advocates, new Medicaid requirement guidance and how this will impact people in states, federal funding, of course, appropriations. We'll review where workforce funding stands today. And also, we'll give you some updates on our new Promise to Work campaign that was launched earlier this year. With that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Caroline, who's going to go over the Workforce Bill regulations.
Hi, everyone. Great to be with you today. Thanks for joining us. So, starting with Workforce Pell regulations, if you all attended our last network call, you'll remember us talking about how Workforce Pell, which expands the Pell Grant to short-term, high-quality training programs, passed Congress in July 2025 as part of the One Big Beautiful Build Act. You'll also remember that this is a big priority of National Skills Coalition. We're excited about this. We've advocated for it for a very long time because of the opportunity that it creates for low income workers to train for high quality, in demand jobs and for small businesses to meet their hiring needs. And if you remember from our last network call, we were waiting for the Department of Education to release the final rules to guide states on workforce Pell implementation. And those rules are finally here. So we are going to review what's in them and why it's important for advocates. So the rules re-emphasized that July 1st start date is a go. So programs can start being eligible in just a couple of weeks. But just candidly, I don't think we are expecting many programs to be up and running by July 1st. I think it'll be a small number of pilot programs that are ready to go by July 1st. Um, as you may have heard me say many times, Workforce Pell implementation will be a marathon, not a sprint. Most states are still in the process of getting ready. And so, again, programs are going to take several years to ramp up. The final rules, really the big takeaway is that they re-emphasized that states are in the driver's seat and are making many of the key decisions around Workforce Pell implementation. For example, the Department of Education declined to establish federal definitions or federal requirements for the processes that states will need to set up. So everything that you see on this screen, states will be responsible for, giving states a lot of flexibility. And my main takeaway for stakeholders about this is that continue having conversations with your governor's workforce office and your local community colleges to make sure that you are involved in the process as things ramp up. In addition to those kind of main takeaways, about states having a lot of flexibility and the July 1 start date. I also wanted to explore how the department reacted to National Skills Coalition's public comments, which we submitted to the department to influence the final regulations. So the first ask that we brought up in our public comments was around supporting data modernization. And the department responded by recognizing that this lack of data, whether it's around enhanced wage records or job placement data, is a huge barrier for states to implementation. But the department also acknowledged that, of course, any grant making to support new data infrastructure falls outside of the scope of these regulations. But that gives us an opportunity to make sure that the Department of Education continues to prioritize data grants when it comes to implementation if they want implementation to be successful. Continuing education was also a main ask within our public comments. So currently, the job placement metric for Workforce Pell eligibility is that 70% of folks who complete a Workforce Pell eligible program must be placed in a job that is in demand and for which the program prepares them for. And so there was concerns that because these programs are also supposed to be stackable, that many students would continue their education and wouldn't count towards the job placement, thereby disqualifying some really quality programs. So we asked for them to kind of revise this, but the department ultimately declined to include those who continue their education in the job placement calculation. However, they did chose to exclude those folks who continue their education from a different eligibility calculation called the value added earnings calculation. That's a different metric that is calculated by the department to ensure that the median earnings of program completers is greater than the cost of the program, ensuring that students are making more money they invest. So if you continue your education, unfortunately, you won't be counted as placed in the job placement, but you will be excluded from your earnings being calculated as eligibility. So really, that just emphasizes that the Department of Ed still sees job placement as the primary purpose of Workforce Pell, rather than continuing education. Next up, the 25% partnership rule. So right now, if you are an institute of higher education that is um, eligible for receiving Workforce Pell funds, you can partner up to 25% with a training organization or a business that isn't eligible for HEA funds. So again, think of that as a business, an adult education provider, a union, etc. And we heard from many of you that 25% was not high enough and that it should be up to 50%. Specifically, we heard this for CDL programs and electrician and electrical work as well. Brought this up for us of wanting that 49% to 50%. And that's consistent with other federal financial aid programs. Um, the department chose to keep it at 25% for now, but with an important exception for registered apprenticeship programs. So, apprenticeships can partner up to 50% and provide the training with the eligible institution. That is likely in service of the president's goal to reach 1 million apprenticeships. But from what I'm hearing from many of you is that, there's some difficulty braiding those two systems and kind of bringing those two systems together, Workforce Pell, higher ed, and apprenticeship. So this is an opportunity for us to continue to advocate with the Department of Education, and hopefully in a few years, we can get that up to 49%. And then the last priority we heard from all of you was around business engagement. Businesses, of course, play a really important role in Workforce Pell implementation, specifically around providing insights on hiring needs and curriculum development. Similar to data modernization, the department acknowledged how important it is to bring industry in, and and promised to include further technical assistance on this topic and committed to working with the Small Business Administration and other agencies to make sure there's technical assistance around how to engage with businesses for Workforce Pell success. And then a couple other major provisions in the final rules here. So that value added earnings calculation that I mentioned, previously cohort size had to be 50. It got bumped down to 30, which I've heard from our rural partners is really appreciated because then they can still get that value added earnings metric calculated even with a smaller cohort size. Um, Also, another, major issue that was brought up was the idea of multilateral state agreements. So, for example, if you have a program that operates in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, is there possibilities to create, processes for the region, definitions for the region, et cetera? Is there chances to align high wage, high demand in industry? And so this is a place where the Department of Ed, again, committed to supporting bilateral state agreements. So starting with two states, which is, a cautious approach. But again, there in the future, there's opportunities to, once, implementation takes off to maybe look into multilateral state agreements. And then finally, we talked about the Pell shortfall on our last network call. Currently, there's not enough um, mandated funding to fund the Pell program in all of Congress. And so the Department of Education committed to continuing to working with Congress on mitigating the Pell shortfall. So that was a little bit of what we saw in the final rules. I just wanted to flag that National Skills Coalition sent an national organization letter up to the Department of Education. In addition to our own comments, we also sent one in coalition with the groups that you see on the screen. So I wanted to thank those folks for signing on and helping write our recommendation. I also spoke to many of you to inform our public comment. So thank you for contributing your expertise and your experience. And then I know that many folks also used our template that we provided as a guide to submit their own comments. So just wanted to thank you all for making sure that, Workforce Pell can be implemented as equitably as possible. And then, even though, this team is on the federal side, I did want to just provide a very brief, non-comprehensive overview of some examples of how states are approaching Workforce Pell. So there's a few different ways that we've seen it. We've seen some states begin to form advisory committees through their state workforce agencies in Connecticut and New Mexico. This is great because we see these groups really bringing together diverse stakeholders, and specifically in Connecticut, they're starting to do some case making around funding to and infrastructure development to get those enhanced wage records, as well as bringing businesses together to make that case. We've also seen some states pass legislation for the program approval process in Florida and California. So definitely check those out if that's something your state is considering. Florida has already published a Workforce Pell certification process and a state-approved eligible program list through the governor's approval process. So they're making some headway. We've also seen some states release really great state plans, such as Maryland, who designated the Maryland Governor's Workforce Development Board as the entity responsible for administering much of the approval and certification process. So it's really great to see workforce playing such a central role in Maryland. And then finally, we're also seeing some states invest in Workforce Pell implementation, such as California recently passed an appropriations funding bill for Workforce Pell specifically. out of their state legislature. So lots going on in the states. Again, that's not a comprehensive overview, but just wanted to give you all kind of a taste of what's happening. And so, what is next for Workforce Pell? Like Nakeisha said at the top of the call, if you haven't been in touch with your member of Congress since the summit, now is a great time to send them an update about how your state is thinking about Workforce Pell and the complementary policies that Congress could enact to make implementation easier. We know that Workforce Pell won't solve all the challenges related to post-secondary access, so continuing to advocate for complementary policies is crucial. We outlined many of these in our 2026 legislative agenda. They're what you all advocated for with policymakers on the Hill during the summit. That includes bills like the College Transparency Act, to provide stakeholders with access to data around higher education and workforce outcomes, including information on non-degree credentials. Complementary policies also include investing in holistic wraparound supports through WIOA reauthorization, and it includes supporting training partnerships between businesses and training providers through the Gateways to Careers Act. So again, we really hope that you all keep advocating for holistic supports for students. And we do have many publications and resources to help states navigate this process, including a guide to implementation for states and a guide to braiding other policies with Workforce Pell, such as work-based learning, industry partnerships. So definitely check those out. There's too many to go into detail on this call. And then also wanted to preview for you all, we will have a Business Leaders United publication this month, so geared towards small and mid-sized business owners about how they can be involved in Workforce Pell. So that is coming out soon, so stay tuned for that. Um, I know we got a couple questions in the chat. We'll take those right at the end. Really appreciate them. For now, I'm going to move on from Workforce Pell to the new Medicaid work requirements. So, for the first time ever, Congress has mandated states to implement Medicaid work reporting requirements nationwide. This is through the 2025 passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And, in one sentence, what this means is that certain adults will have to regularly prove that they are working, enrolled in school or training, volunteering, or participating in another approved activity in order to keep their health care. So this policy applies to certain adults ages 19 through 64 who are enrolled in Medicaid. There are some exceptions, such as if you are a pregnant person, if you're disabled, or if you care for young children or relatives. So those affected by this will typically need to complete, again, at least 80 hours per month of qualifying activities to maintain their healthcare benefits. Um, it's just, it's hard to even talk about, but those qualifying activities can include paid work, education or training, community service, participation in certain workforce programs, or a combination of those approved activities. And this is a workforce development issue because, as you all know on this call, basic needs are workforce, like healthcare, our workforce needs. They're completely intertwined, and this is a longstanding issue for NSC, back to our founding, standing against work requirements because the evidence shows that they really don't lead to greater employment and instead lead to confusion and people losing coverage. Healthcare is taken away from people who were already working or learning or caregiving, not because they refuse to work, but because of the difficulty in navigating cumbersome paperwork and reporting hurdles. But the good news is states have some discretion around implementation details, such as what specific community service opportunities qualify or which state and local workforce programs are available. So, in our latest blog, we outlined 5 recommendations for state leaders to mitigate the effects of these work requirements. I don't have time to go through all 5. I encourage you to check out the blog, but I'll just kind of give one overall recommendation that should be pretty familiar. It's pretty consistent with NSC's other recs. We recommend aligning healthcare, workforce, and education systems as best as you can in your states to support workers. So that looks like connecting Medicaid eligible workers and learners to meaningful employment, education, training, and supportive services to not only meet their work requirements, but improve their economic mobility. So a big, not easy to do task, but that is, what we'll be working with states on. And I'll pass it over to Megan. That's Medicaid work requirements, and now she'll cover appropriations.
Hi everyone, Megan Evans. When we last met, we talked about the president's budget request. And for those who aren't familiar, the president's budget request kicks off the appropriations process in Congress. So the president puts out his request, which is largely a list of policy priorities, but not something that can become law. And then Congress has a series of hearings to hear from the different departments and administrations and agencies to hear justification about that budget request. And then the Appropriations Committee in both the Senate and House, gather to create their own bills that will actually fund the programs and the departments and the agencies for the coming fiscal year, which would be fiscal year 2027. We are currently in fiscal year 2026. So that's where we left off the last time we convened our network meeting. Since then, the House has released their appropriations package for the departments of Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education, and have approved that in committee. Um, and that just happened last week. Oh, I'm looking at this now and I'm seeing this chart is difficult to read, but you will have access to it when we send out the slides, and I'll go into deeper detail. I won't spend a lot of time on this, just because it is so hard to see little numbers on a screen. Um, but the big takeaway from the labor HHS bill, which is what I'll call it, which again is the departments of Labor, Health and Human Services, Education, and related agencies being funded in the House, is that it's going to make pretty significant cuts to the programs that are going to support training and education. So it eliminates $3.7 billion from the Department of Labor budget, with most of that coming from Employment and Training Administration. And then it eliminates, or proposes to eliminate rather, 8.14 billion from the Department of Education. Not all of that comes from the training programs and education programs that NSC specifically tracks, but we also know that education programs writ large are important to our network, and so we wanted to point that out. What I will say is the House Republican appropriators proposal is quite similar to what we saw from them last year in FY26. And it also reflects many of the similarities that we see from the president's budget, especially around where they propose to cut programs in their entirety. What we don't see is the Make America Skilled Again proposal, which would take 12 programs and turn them into a block grant program to states while simultaneously making cuts. So that is something that we continue to look for in proposals, and we don't see it here in this one. That said, this bill does eliminate WIOA youth entirely. It eliminates the RIO program, Reentry Employment Opportunities, which serves justice-impacted youth and adults. It eliminates funding for the Migrant and Seasonal Farm Worker Program, which provides job training to both farm workers and their dependents. And then it entirely eliminates the Senior Community Service Employment Program, which supports low-income unemployed seniors. And these are programs that support populations with barriers to employment. They're specific populations, and these have specific purposes. So it's really frustrating to see that these would be cut entirely, especially as we're trying to support folks with outstanding barriers. Um, in addition to that, we also see WIOA adult cut or eliminated in all but name, or in everything but name. And the way it does this is a little bit tricky. There's something called advance appropriations, and I don't want to get too technical, but I think it is important to understand. So in the current year bill that we're under, because educational workforce programs require more certainty in the year advance to make sure that they can hire people, that they can plan for program year offerings, staffing in general. They need to know more in advance than, October of the same year. And so what that means for appropriations is that we have something called advance appropriations. And so in FY26, Congress appropriated $712 million that would begin to be available in October of 2027. So FY26, October 26. See, I even get mixed up and I'm constantly in this stuff. So in fiscal year 2027. Um, in this bill, what it does is it takes back that money that would have started this coming October, and it says that you can have 712 million starting in October of 2027, so fiscal year 2028, a full not next fiscal year, but the following. But it's taking back what would have come available in October. What that means in practice is that money is only offset by $164 million that was set into the current fiscal year bill that would come available in July of this year. And it does not appropriate that same money for the next fiscal year. So what you are seeing is WIOA adult effectively eliminated. And I know that I spent a lot of time on that, but I do think it's important to understand how that happens in the bill. Additionally, we see even where programs aren't eliminated entirely, we do see some pretty significant cuts. So Job Corps, for instance, is cut in half to $880 million, while that is more than what the president's budget would have proposed, which was a cut of 90% essentially to phase out the program. It's still a devastating cut to that program. We see a slightly less harmful cut in the Wagner-Peiser Employment Service budget, cutting it $6 million. And then even where we see programs that are just kept level for inflation, as we see with the Workforce Data Quality Initiative and WIOA dislocated worker funds for states. When we think about inflation, you're losing value because costs are rising. And if we look across 25 years, because we've been doing that for so long, the real value of programs has been cut nearly in half across that time period because we're not investing more. We're often at best keeping them level, which really means a cut over across 25 years. So it's death by 1,000 cuts. We do see a few places where there are increases in budgets. The Community College Training Grant Program got a slight increase well, I shouldn't say slight, it's a significant increase compared to the 65 million budget it currently gets. It increases to $75 million, which is welcome. Both Native American programs and Youth Build get a $2.5 million plus up for 65 million and $107.5 million total, respectively. And then Apprenticeship gets a $5 million plus up to 290 million. I'm not surprised to see an increase here, given how important this is to the Trump administration, who's seeking to increase apprenticeships by 1 million or 1 million. But $5 million isn't quite where it needs to be to get to that level. We're not going to hit the pacing we need at that level. And then we also see Dislocated Worker National Reserve get a substantial plus up of 25 million. What I will say about this is it's really welcome to see some increases in this, but those increases aren't really offsetting or making up for the fact that we see those really intense cuts elsewhere. And so even if we're adding some funding to some programs if you're eliminating programs that are serving specific populations or meeting specific needs. You're not really helping the system overall. Uh, on the education side, another big cut is that adult education is eliminated entirely in terms of funding. We saw this last year as well. And, this is a program that provides literacy, numeracy, digital literacy training, English language training, work readiness, and high school equivalency skills. And again, these are programs that help people with barriers to employment, which is particularly harmful if our goal is to help more people participate in the economy. Um, Typically, adult education and career and technical education are paired in appropriations legislation. And so it's interesting to see that while adult education is eliminated completely, CTE state grants get a $10 million plus up, showing sort of where the priority is for House Republicans in particular. Uh, I will also note that the maximum Pell Award increases $50 total to $7,445, which is welcome. However, as Caroline mentioned, there is a Pell Fund shortfall right now. And the way that they propose eliminating that and paying for this $50 increase is by eliminating subsidized loans for undergraduates. So essentially, they're paying for this slight increase and the shortfall on the backs of low and middle income families. And it's not going to help make college more affordable or more accessible. So while we want to see that $17 billion Pell shortfall closed, and we don't want to disadvantage Workforce Pell just as it's about to come online, we should do so in a way that's not paid for on the backs of low and middle income students. I also wanted to note one interesting piece. Oh, I think I skipped over it. In the accompanying report language, so there's often a bill text that has, what would get potentially passed into law, and then there's accompanying report language, which is sort of extra details that the committee wants folks to know. In there, they include a $15 million workforce readiness grant around artificial intelligence and innovation, which makes sense given how rapid deployment of AI is taking place and the focus both from Congress and the administration. But $15 million is pretty small, and they're doing this at the same time they're cutting the programs that have more robust budgets that are already doing the work to train folks in the types of skills and the types of education folks are going to need both to build AI equipment and infrastructure and also be able to use it and understand it. And so it's an interesting juxtaposition that I wanted to point out. I also wanted to note that, one of the challenges with this bill is that we're seeing more cuts, as I pointed out, even with keeping certain programs level, inflation's really turning into a cut. And we're asking the programs to do more with less every year, and yet expecting them to have same or better outcomes. And so this is not really helping the program achieve what it's meant to achieve. We're really hampering it before it even has the ability to reach its potential. I did want to point out a couple more education pieces because I know folks will be interested in them. C Campus stays level for the year. Vocational rehabilitation state grants get a pretty sizable plus up of $121.6 million. And then, unfortunately, the basic needs grants that typically support students in college are cut in half to $5 million. It was already a pretty small program, but it's unfortunate to see that program cut further. I already mentioned this, so I'm out of order. I apologize. So that was just the House. They passed that, reported that out of committee, so it would still need to go to the House floor. And I don't want to alarm folks because what happened last year is probably a little bit similar to what's going to happen in the end this year, though we face a few more headwinds. So last year, the Senate released a more measured proposal that was largely kept all programs level. There were a few cuts here and there. There were some additional language included. And ultimately, where we ended up last year was a largely level, flat funded bill. I know that there were some programs that were cut, and I'm not trying to minimize the impact of that, but it was not as harsh as what we're seeing with this House bill and what we saw with last year's House bill. Um, that's essentially where I think we will end up when we pass a full year bill. That said, there are stronger headwinds Senate side. They're having much harder time coming to a top line proposal conversation. They really aren't working yet on the labor HHS bill. And so that process is being pushed further down the line, allowing this House bill to have more air. Because while it was passed in committee on a partisan process, um, they did pass something, right? And so it's getting more airtime than the Senate that doesn't have anything out yet. What I suspect is that we won't see anything final until after the midterms. Folks are going to want to see how that plays out. And so we're likely to have at least one short-term CR. The benefit of that is that that gives us a longer timeline as advocates to educate offices on how cuts would impact folks, on what these programs do. You would be surprised at how many offices don't really understand how impactful programs are on the ground. And so your voice is really important for helping them understand that and making the case for these programs. So we have a letter that we recently sent up to the Hill around what we had asked for with coalition partners. In an appropriations bill, we've sent it both to the House and Senate. I will put that link to that in the chat so that you have that. I will also post a link to the blog where we outlined a lot of this content, so you can have a closer look at the chart and you can read a little bit more about how some of these things work without me stammering through it. Um, so hopefully that'll be easier to read through. And then also we have a Q&A section next. But before we have that, I will pass things back to Nakeisha, who I think is going to wrap up the slides for us.
Yes. So thanks everyone for staying on. I want to just go ahead and just kind of give an update on our new promise of work and just say that we're on the road. I also add the link where you can sign up. We're taking our conversation from face to face to in person in the areas of our partners. So currently we just left Texas. We're out in California, Northern and Southern California. We're headed to New Mexico, Ohio, Alabama, Boston, West Virginia, just to name a few. If you're interested in this work and you want to stay connected, I highly encourage you to sign up for the campaign newsletters where we'll just be dropping updates, resources, blogs, and other opportunities for you to stay engaged. And then also follow us on LinkedIn and sign up for our notifications where you'll get instant blogs and analysis from Megan and Caroline. Then also you'll be able to save the date for our next network call, which will happen in August. With that, I will pause and then we'll turn it over to Q&A.
Amazing. I can start on the Q&A because I see there's a few questions about Workforce Pell, so I will start there.